Welcome to the Art for Wellbeing project for 1A Arts. This is our second presentation called Art is an Open Landscape. The idea for this presentation and for the project in general is to help you with your creativity and to find that confidence to be creative. The title, that Art is an Open Landscape, is based on the idea that in art you are free to roam that landscape and discover it for yourself. Every turn you make, every choice you make has some beneficial aspects to it. You can learn, you can find more about what you like, what you want to create, and it's your journey to define. The artist Kandinsky once said that there is no must in art because art is free. Again, it's this idea of freedom within art, freedom to create what you would like to create, whether you feel like you're a beginner at art or you have a little bit more experience. Gaining that confidence and that freedom just to be expressive, be creative, it's one of the holy grails of art, but something that is easily accessible to both beginners and people who've had a little bit more experience. Whether we're creating art or looking at art, we all have things that we're drawn to. It's what you like, and hopefully we can help you gain that confidence in your own intuition to follow that path. Last week we looked at some themes which you could respond to within this project. 4 themes. There are many others, but we chose 4. And I'm just going to do a brief recap to remind you. So the first is identity, which is based on the self, on portrait, society, human experience. And here we have a little selection. We have Vincent van Gogh, Lucian Freud, Craigie Aitchison, and Frida Kahlo, each expressing similar ideas around identity, but all in very unique ways. Our second is a sense of place. So this is landscape, environment, nature, atmosphere. It's really based on that idea of an artist getting to know their surroundings, being in awe of nature, of the landscape. On the top left is a Welsh painter called Kyffin Williams, painter of Welsh landscape. Top right, Paul Gauguin. Bottom right is an expressive landscape painter, contemporary abstract painter, Louise Ballum. And then we have Frank Auerbach at the bottom, who painted, again, quite abstract portraits and cityscapes as well. Our next theme was observation, still life, domestic scenes, impressions of the things that are around us, the things that we see day to day, but through art can actually put a new spotlight onto. We can elevate them from, a day-to-day object to something of beauty, of contemplation. At top left, we have Sarah Spackman, who's a contemporary painter of still lifes. Then we have Pierre Bonnard on the right, lovely domestic scene there. At the bottom right is Redon, a still life of flowers. And then bottom left is Winifred Nicholson, a British painter. She's not with us anymore, but she painted beautiful, quiet, light-filled still lives. And then we have our 4th theme, which is a recap, is abstract. So that's expressive, material, spirituality. It's the theme where colour and form and light and atmosphere, along with texture, takes over from representation. On the top left, we have Hiroshi Matsumoto, who's a contemporary painter, paints very small abstract paintings full of texture and colour. Top right is Joan Mitchell, a 1950s painter. She really uses brushstroke and line in these explosions of colour and form. And the bottom right is Etel Adnan, a painter of landscapes in many ways, but they are abstract paintings based on pared down colours, forms. And then bottom left is Mark Rothko, one of the famous abstract expressionist painters who saw abstract art as a form of deep spiritual representation through colour, depth and atmosphere. So with our themes, please do find one that speaks to you the most. Again, there are no rules. If you have a theme of your own, please choose that direction. The themes act as guides, as markers to which you can respond. But again, art is an open landscape. There are no rules. It's for you to determine. A featured artist for this presentation, An Open Landscape, is Kurt Jackson. So Kurt Jackson is a contemporary painter based down in Cornwall. He paints the local environment with real intensity and intimacy. He was born in 1961. So Kurt Jackson, as you can see from the photo, likes to paint outdoors. It's very much part of his practice that he's absorbed in the environment. Here he is on a riverbank with a huge piece of canvas, and it doesn't look like the nicest of days, but nonetheless he's outside. Many outdoors painters paint on small canvases, but here he's got a large one, and it seems that the mud and the water and everything else is part of the painting. So Kurt Jackson says that natural history and art have been the two passions throughout my life and now come together in informing my art practice. I walk the banks or just sit and stare, anything to get a glimpse and ultimately see and paint what shares this amazing place with us. His love for the landscape and involvement in it produces some beautiful work. His work is, on a technical level, it's quite abstract. It clearly represents the landscape, but it also takes on a life of its own. It has an interpretation of a landscape through texture, colour, form that departs from reality and is expressive in many ways. You can see at the bottom that it incorporates words and text into his paintings. In this painting here, which seems to be a little bit more direct, there's less texture in it, but he's used a technique which we're going to explore today, where he's splattering the paint onto the paper or canvas. This creates these interesting sort of dappled light effects, and in many ways art is the accumulation of, or painting I should say, painting a successful picture is the accumulation of techniques, of different techniques of how to represent what you want to represent. Very similar to what I've done in the last presentation. I've put Kurt Jackson here at the centre of this spider diagram. So these are the things that really are the elements of Kurt Jackson's art practice. So we've got outdoors, we've got landscape, environment, clouds, sea, nature, Cornwall. We all have these elements to who we are as people, but also to who we are as artists. Different things appeal to us and we're drawn to different things. And art can be that vehicle to express those things that we're passionate about. Here's another painting by Kurt Jackson, who again, he's taken it's clearly a seascape, but you could see it's verging on being an abstract painting with different textures, fluid, textured paint, thick paint, thin paint. He's got his text up in the top as well. And on the bottom you can see here that there are little stones that have actually been incorporated into the painting. So Kurt Jackson really puts the landscape literally into his pictures as he paints them. Here we do a little breakdown on the materials and techniques that Kurt Jackson uses. It's always interesting to know what materials artists are using, because if we want to paint in a certain way, really getting to know your materials is a very important thing. Techniques as well, but materials are just as important. There are things you can do with some materials that you can't with others. So he's using acrylic and gouache and watercolour, found objects, sand, canvas and paper. And his techniques are layering, blending, wet in wet, which means putting wet paint into wet paint that's already on the canvas, texturing, collaging, and then splattering, as I described earlier. In this, I've broken down some of the elements that are in his painting. Lots of different techniques and choices that he's made along the way. I find the addition of the netting that he's found along the beach very interesting. But take some time, pause the video and just have a look at some of those different techniques that he's using. Here's another painting, again verging on the abstract. It's halfway between abstract and representation. It's really quite important to understand that tension between abstraction and reality in painting. Abstract painting could go one way and go right towards a Mark Rothko, where he's just using colour and the basic of forms, and then this way towards something that is nearly representational. All art is abstracted from reality. It's just about how the artist plays with that tension between the representation and the abstraction. Here's another wonderful painting. Seems much more simple in its layout, but he's using all of those different techniques. The orange and red and yellow are blended into each other. There's texture in the foreground. Even though the tree line at the back, we know what it is. If you see, it's actually just made up of shapes and marks. And again, that's where that abstraction comes in. Sometimes we want to paint a tree and paint all of the leaves on the branch, but paint can do marvellous things with a few techniques. You can make it look as though they are trees without actually telling people they are trees. Now we're going to look at a few techniques, and these are techniques that Kurt Jackson is using in his paintings. They're best suited for water-based mediums, so not oil paint, but acrylic, gouache, watercolour. These techniques work really well. They're very simple to do, but it's all of these little techniques that help you have more tools at your disposal when you're painting. So the first is splattering. Very easy to do, but it can be used to great effect. As you can see here in a Kurt Jackson painting, this looks like I've actually cropped it out of a larger image, but it's a moonlit water. So you can see here he's using the splattering to create that effect of light on water. On the left-hand side, he's used less comparison to the right-hand side, where it's more dense. This creates this effect of light and dark. So the techniques and materials, so you can do this with gouache, watercolour, acrylic. 50-50 dilution of water and paint is sufficient, though you can experiment. Dry surface is better. You can do it into wet paint, but you'll see that the flicks will bleed into the wet paint or the water. And try different brushes. Old toothbrushes are particularly good, so techniques of flicking the brush bristles. A dark colour over a light background works really well. as does a light colour over a dark background. You can build up layers, you can add different colours, and you can mask certain areas so the whole picture's not covered in the flicked paint. Here is some still images of how you would hold the brush. You can see I'm just using my finger to flick the brush hairs. Here's a video I'm going to show you, a technique. So I'm picking up some light blue colour, about 50-50 water and paint, and then just flicking the bristles of the brush to create that splatter effect. You'll find that the closer you are will have a different effect, and the further away you are, a different effect. And what I'm going to do in this one is add a little different colour to it. You can see there that I've probably got too much water and paint on there. I end up with big blobs. It's all trial and error. And I take that away and you can see where I've masked it. So if you want a clean edge, that's how you do it. Just place a piece of paper there. But you can build up multiple colours on top of there. You can play with your complementary colours or primary colours or different shades of colour. Here I demonstrate how you do it onto a dark background, so light paint over dark works really well. So you can see that the white is really showing up. Now, doing it on white paper, obviously you won't get the same effect. So you can really alternate the different effects. Now we come on to our second technique that we done in the workshop, and it is blending. Again, very simple on the surface, but really useful to know these different types of blendings. Kurt Jackson has used blending in his paintings here. On the bottom you see a sort of a brushed blending, and then at the top it's much looser and less defined, less lines, but it's all about blending with water, blending with other colours, blending with white. So here we are again, we've got our materials. We're using gouache, paint diluted. You can use it straight out of the tube, but you'll find it's quite difficult to move around. Water, and try different brushes. Different brushes will have different effects. And the techniques, blending one colour into another. Use water to blend the edges. Vary the amount of water. So you can have small amounts of water, a lot of water. It's all for experimentation. That means that when you decide you want to do a particular thing, you've already experimented, so you know how much water to add or not. So try different brushes. I've repeated myself there, I see. And try using white to blend. So blending with water, and I've got a little video here to show you the blending with water. I've laid down a flat colour of paint, and then by getting a clean brush but dipping it in water, and I apologise for the video quality, my the camera is in one hand and I'm painting with the other, so it's a bit shaky. But you can see I'm blending the dryish paint with the water, and it's creating that nice bleedy granulation effect. Again, with watercolour and with gouache, you can use the white of the paper as a light shining through it, whereas in oil painting you tend to add white to create these effects of light, but watercolour and gouache are a little bit different. So our next is blending with white, and here I'm taking some white paint and blending it into another flat area of colour. It automatically makes it opaque, so you don't get the pure white of the paper coming through beneath, but you can play around with those different things. So some areas can be blended with white and some with water. So blending two colours together. This is really good for painting. You get to learn more about colours, and they actually mix on the paper as you're blending them. So here I've just laid down some blue, and what I'm going to add into it is a little bit of the crimson red and some water, and start bleeding it in. You can see the transparency then again there through the paper. Take any colour, try. Some colours will work well together, others won't. Painting is about depicting things, but it's also about the effects that you can create with the paint, with different techniques. So I hope that was useful. If you've got any questions, do feel free to ask. Now we've got a few of those techniques in our mind, and we've learnt a little bit about them. What we're going to do, and we've done this in the Zoom meeting, look at one of these images and interpret it in whatever way you want. So you can use some of those techniques that we've learnt, the splattering, the blending, or you can do it in your own style. The key is to observe the photograph and to do an interpretation of the photograph. It's very difficult to paint in a photographic style. You may want to try, but I always recommend doing an interpretation of it. Let the paint be paint, and let photography be photography. Paint can do some marvellous things. It's about how you express yourself with it. So in the PDF, these two images will be featured. If you want to choose another landscape image that you do yourself, please go ahead.